Hey, fellow patriots, I'm Bree.
And I'm Blaze. Some call me Pa. It has been said that we have 4 boxes to keep ourselves free. These are the soapbox, the ballot box, the jury box, and the ammo box.
And we are the 4th box. We are here to arm you with enough information, resources, and skills to take back your freedom, increase your self-sufficiency, and inspire you to join in the fight against tyranny.
Thomas Jefferson said, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty." Thank you for joining us and for joining in this fight.
Welcome back to the 4th box. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the 4th box. Glad to be here. We have a great guest that we're going to introduce momentarily. Before we do that, Pops, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, hello everybody. George, nice meeting you. Happy to have you on board with us here tonight. Greetings to all of our friends out there who join with us weekly here at the virtual Buckman Tavern. You know, it's a place where patriots gather, and here we have the 4th box studio tucked away safely, and we are raising a glass tonight. I have a nice frothy Irish stout to raise to all of our friends tonight. But I wanted to cheer a man who endured the harassment of cowards and sheep in an effort to exercise his God-given rights. On May 29th, 2025, President Trump issued a full and unconditional pardon to First Lieutenant Mark Bashaw, the only service member in U.S. military history court-martialed for refusing to comply with unlawful COVID-19 mandates. So I'm raising my glass in salute of First Lieutenant Mark Bashaw. In addition, I wanted to mention, in a rare display of clarity, Rahm Emanuel made some statements related to how far off the rails the loony left had gone, and basically called their whole party a bunch of punks, which I found to be quite interesting. And I assumed immediately that perhaps he was making a play for positioning himself as a stable voice in the loony left group that they're probably trying to find somebody to rally around. And I thought that might have been the root behind that remark. But anyway, to First Lieutenant Mark Bashaw, and having endured what he did on behalf of standing for his God-given rights and rejecting the COVID-19 vaccination, and to all our friends out there, a big salute.
Yeah, cheers.
So I have a quote tonight. "If the freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to the slaughter." And that comes from no other than George Washington, who had many great quotes, but that was certainly one. And it really does shine the light on the importance of free speech and free press. And certainly that includes the writing of books. And we're very happy to have with us tonight the author of a book that I'm hoping to get into. So without anything more, Bree, I'm ready to kick it back over to you.
Cool. So I'll do my attempt at a little intro for our guest, George. Thanks for the quote and the toast tonight. I think it was a good one to start us off on. So, George, welcome to the 4th box. Guys, George Kemper is with us. He's an American author, veteran, and advocate for the individual liberties and natural rights that belong to each and every one of us. Drawing from his life experience and deep conviction in the principles of freedom, he authored A Hill Worth Dying On, which really serves as a bold examination of what true freedom is meant to be, a reminder of what it takes to keep it, and a rallying cry to take a stand on this hill that deserves all of our eternal vigilance. So, George, that's my little spiel, but why don't you take it away? Give us a little bit more background here. Who are you, and why did you become engaged in this fight against tyranny?
No, thank you for the introduction. Thanks for having me tonight. It's awesome to be here. So I guess the little intro about myself, the elevator speech, so to say, is I'm from Chicago, born and raised. I After high school, I tried college for about 2 years, left school, joined the Army, served in the 101st Airborne, deployed to Syria in 2019. And then when I got out of the Army in 2020, I started going back to school. I ran for state representative in Illinois in the 2022 election. And then during this most recent election, I was the state director of Illinois for Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s campaign. And up until now, been dabbling in a handful of different things. Always kind of an American movement. I've always said, I'm proud of my country. I'm proud to be an American. And everything I do is trying to help our fellow countrymen. And so that's where the idea of the freedom movement inspired me. And especially like a lot of us with the COVID restrictions, with how things happen, that's kind of what spurred it for me in wanting to get more involved rather than just, we all vote, we all talk to our friends or post online. But I felt that there was more to do. And so with everything from 2020 to 22, that's what really kind of spurred it for me.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I love that you dove right in. Pops, I know that you're already going to have questions probably about his runs for office and such there. So why don't you take that?
Well, I am, and even before that, thank you for your service, and we are a very veteran supportive group here at our podcast, big supporters of all veterans, and we do appreciate your service. And as an airborne, I'm going to guess you were an infantryman secondarily to the 101st Screaming Eagles. Is that correct?
I was in 11 Charlie, so infantry mortarman.
You were the mortars, okay. And did you do any jumps overseas?
No, so the 101st Airborne is a air assault unit now.
Okay.
So we use helicopters, fast roping, rappelling. That's what the 101st does now. They're no longer an actual airborne unit.
Okay.
So for the history buffs out there, they've kept the name airborne in the unit name because of the history from World War I to keep that legacy. But they are no longer technically an airborne unit. So unfortunately, I never got the chance to jump out of airplanes.
Well, the 101st is still certainly a unit with a long and storied past. And whether they switched from fixed wing to rotary aircraft, I'm sure that they are at the forefront of leading our country's defense and representing the best of America.
It was a great unit to be in, the history aspect and all around. Still to this day, just phenomenal leaders and phenomenal guys from the top down. So I'm honored to have been part of that and for the time that I was in.
Yeah, well, thank you, and again, thanks for your service. And then I'm going to rotate right to, as Bree said, you stood for state rep.
Yes.
Was that in a Chicago district? I would have to think that might be a little difficult with the overall politics in that area.
It was. So it was pretty much in the heart of downtown Chicago almost.
Oh, wow.
Very, very blue area. And I went into it knowing that I had a snowball's chance in hell. Mm-hmm. But it was still fresh out of COVID. And my mentality was, if we don't start taking steps to stand up for what we believe in, then who else is going to? And so I saw the opportunity, and my mentality in life in general is, if there's an opportunity given to me, I'm going to jump on it and take it. And so this was one of those where I recognized the margins were, not in my favor, but someone needed to step up to the plate and take a swing. And so, if not me, who? And it was a great experience. I was able to learn a lot. I was able to interact with a ton of individuals within that district. We were going door to door. We were real grassroots style about it. And, I'm proud of it. I got about, I think it was 20% of the vote when all said and done, just about that. And so considering it's heart of Chicago, I'm proud of that. And I think the best part about it was when I would go door to door and when I would be speaking to people, whether in that moment or later, I would get emails or phone calls or face-to-face of people saying, hey, I'm a lifelong Democrat, but I really like your message. You're not a typical Republican or the Republican that I have the vision of. Because it's hard for me to, I really don't like to say that I'm a Republican because there's so much of the party that I disagree with.
Amen.
And so it was interesting to see so many people who are lifelong Democrats say, I'm voting blue down the ticket, but I am going to vote for you. And so that was encouraging, even on the small scale, even on the scale that, it didn't go in my favor. If I know that I was able to help push some people in the right direction of let's mend the bridge and let's focus on common goals, then I did my part so far. And maybe I made it easier for the next person to run. And so they don't have to, chip away, and they can chip away a little bit more, so to speak.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, first of all, I want to commend you for that. One of the things that we have always tried to do here with our little podcast is give examples of actions that we can take. I think many of us recognize that things in this country have gone off the rail, and we've really strayed away from the constitutional principles that were supposed to limit government and provide the rest of the freedoms for us. And one of the points that I was interested in, because we are a proactive group trying to get people to do things, and standing for office or participating is certainly a place to start. So let me ask you, George, did the Republican Party in itself, did they support you?
They did, yes. I had help from the Chicago GOP and a little bit of support from the Illinois GOP, as much as they could afford. But obviously, it's kind of a trickle-down effect. So there were Congress seats, Senate seats. So the statewiders were worried about those, but the city party did help with my campaign as well as others.
Oh, good. I did not have that kind of support when I stood for sheriff back some years ago. I had previously spent some time in law enforcement and ended up pursuing and standing for the office of sheriff, and the county Republican Party pretty much stayed away from me. I was a bit viewed as a bit of a radical because I had such crazy notions as standing on the Constitution, and we were going to live by it as the chief executive, which the sheriff would be at the county level. But that was a little bit more than most of the Republicans in our county, I guess, was willing to accept. But I'm certainly not here to talk about that. I am very interested in what brought you to the point of your book, and why don't we talk about that? And Bree had some other specific questions, I think.
Yeah, so I'll kind of give the intro of how I started the book and everything. Was during COVID, when there was, it was like every day it felt like there was some new bit of information coming out where we were told one thing, and then we do our research, or an individual like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. would have his take on the matter. And it would, anytime there was conflicting opinions, they'd be pushed down. And so I started just in my phone taking notes of kind of thoughts I had throughout the day. So it was a journal in a sense of, what's my thought on this? And then with the Black Lives Matter protests and the riots that came from that, I would take notes and kind of, how is the government responding? Do I agree with this? No, I don't agree with this sometimes, on different give and take. How are the protesters responding? Sometimes I agree with it, sometimes I don't. And kind of making a diary of how I felt about all those experiences. And after a couple years, it just kind of, opened up the notes section and I realized I had to scroll for a while to get to the bottom. And so I said, wait a second, I've pretty much got a small book here. I've got a booklet here. And from there, I was able to piece it together like a puzzle and organize my thoughts. And that's pretty much the gist of it.
Awesome.
Yeah. I think that's great. I think there were so many people who wanted to do that. I know I always wanted to do that during that time, was like, why am I not writing about this? 10 years from now, we are going to regret not having our thoughts documented during this time, because what's happening is so repulsive. So it's very cool to hear that that's where this story started, because for me, when I read it, it's very all-encompassing of everything going on. But when you think about it in the sense of what you're imagining and feeling during COVID, totally correlates. So I think that's incredible that you were able to turn your thoughts during that time into what it became. Because I really felt that this was kind of like the perfect field guide for anyone who maybe kind of has the idea that something is wrong, but doesn't really know how to define it. And this felt like a great way to outline your thoughts for someone who wants to understand what the country is supposed to be and what we're actually at risk of losing here, or better yet, have already lost. So it sounds like you're working on another version of this book. Is that right?
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback off your last point there, the other part of inspiration was Thomas Paine and his book Common Sense. And I've read that book forward to, front end to back end dozens of times. If I had my copy, I'd show it to you. It's littered with notes and highlighters and everything. And that was another aspect of inspiration where I realized, he was writing this to kind of, like you said, the people feel something's off. People have a feeling of, at the time, rebellion. And he just kind of encompassed all of that, put it in a booklet so that it was easy to dispense, easy to read, and easy to, digest. And my thought was, well, what about a modern day version of that?
Yeah.
It's 50, 60 pages. You can read it in half an hour. And so that was my thought was, let's get something easy. It's not a 500-page book that's going to take, a college seminar to, to learn.
Yeah.
The average Joe can read it, or, the, individual with 4 PhDs can read it. And it's just a book for the every American to, if you have those feelings, you can take it in.
Yeah, it certainly reads as that. It's very digestible. And I think that's why I loved it so much, was because I felt like I could take that and approach anyone with it, no matter what their political leanings were, no matter how educated they were on history or, current events. I felt like I could put that in the hands of somebody and be like, just read this and come back to me after. And it wouldn't be too much. It was very easy to meet anyone where they were at with that. I think that was perfectly done.
No, I appreciate it. And it's funny you said that. Was I actually gave it to a professor I know who's very, very far left. And I gave it to him. I didn't tell him I'd published it. And he read it through and he emailed me a couple weeks later and was like, this is phenomenal. Thank you for sharing with me. Like, we need more of this out there. And so it was a little bit of encouragement for me. I was like, okay, cool. I know this is now, it can resonate with both sides of the aisle. And that was the end goal. And to what you asked earlier is, yes, I am working on a new version, an updated version of it. This one is kind of more meat and potatoes. Or I should say the original was more meat and potatoes. This one, I'm kind of getting into the nitty gritty details.
Okay.
So with certain aspects, I had the broad idea, and now I'm pulling more historical evidence, both far, long time ago and more current events, comparing and contrasting stuff like that, and adding more. There were other thoughts that I've had over the years since I first published it, stuff happening even today. We look at the news. There's always a news cycle that's exploding with information. And so it's still adding to that aspect of stuff. So it'll be more or less the same messaging overall, with just a lot more details and a few new ideas too as well.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. Pops, anything you want to ask from there?
Oh yeah, I always have questions. So, do you consider yourself a student of the Constitution, George?
I do, yes.
Okay, great. Because I was going to say, so much of what becomes evident as you read the book are things that we've been shouting from the rooftops, many of these points for many, many years, way back before the Tea Party, when Bree was a baby. I was involved with many things that are clearly enumerated in this book. And so as one would read it, who's a student of the Constitution and used to teach it at the high school when my kids were in and so forth, I found it to be very well grounded in that, in regards to the Constitution and how we should be requiring the federal government to stay within those confines, which is what it was for. So as you get into your next one, I'm sure you're going to find many opportunities to even take that to another level. And one of the things that we've always described here in support of the Constitution, that even before that, the Magna Carta was very significant in the formation of the Constitution, and before that, ancient Roman law. And one of the things that we've always tried to explain to our listeners here is that all law in this country was based on like English common law, and the formation of the Constitution was really limits to contain this entity that was formed basically as a contract between the 13 independent nation states that, now we're kind of all lumped together. So I found that to be very refreshing, even though I'm going to suggest that you're a bit of a newcomer to this arena, really having been inspired by activities that were going on during the COVID years and that sort of thing to really drag you into it. But one of the great things, as a prior serviceman, we all took that oath, and even when we took our uniform off, that oath did not leave us. So I really appreciate you having a constitutional understanding that you applied and brought forth in this book.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that you noticed that, and I'm glad that it paid off, and the hard work of trying to stay grounded to that. And so thank you. I do appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's important, and it's an interesting idea to bring up because so much of what we're talking about here all the time is so far removed from the Constitution. And to your point, bringing up Thomas Paine's common sense, it really doesn't take more than common sense to recognize that if we just got back to the Constitution in a lot of these spaces, the problem would resolve itself. So I agree with you, Pops. I think it's great that this book is really tied to those concepts, whether a lot of that was intentional or not, but it does sound like, that's where your heart lies. So I'm sure that played a big factor here.
Yeah, I'm sure that some of it I did not intend it. It wasn't like I was sitting there with notes thinking, okay, I have to tie it in. But like yourself, and I really do consider myself a student of the Constitution, a student of history, and I have a passion for it. And so I'm glad to hear that was poured into it, intended in some places, and then also unintentionally, because I look at it as it's, at the end of the day, it's the foundation of our nation. And if, like you said, a lot of these issues would be fixed if we just went back to how it's supposed to be. And I see a lot of it with, the analogy of a house. If you build the house on sand, there's this story of, if you build a house on sand, you have no foundation, it'll crumble. If you ground it on solid ground, then you can grow from there. And I see the Constitution as our ground. If we take it out, we're under sand, and the whole system will collapse eventually. And in many ways, it has already. So if we don't have faith in the Constitution, if we don't at least, and we can disagree with the Constitution, we absolutely can. That's why we have constitutional lawyers and historians who debate it. But we have to respect it. And if we lose respect for it, then it's just a piece of paper. And that's all it becomes. It has no weight, and the last thing we need is to have it lose its weight.
Right. Because then we've lost our foundation.
Exactly. And then where are we?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I 100% agree with that notion. I just think that a large segment of society, including almost everybody who sits in an elected office, whether it be at your local, state, or federal level, has very little understanding, or they have a willful intent to destroy it because we don't live by it at all. And I think largely, George, and tell me if you agree, it's because the majority of people in society have become disconnected and don't have no idea that this was the guideline, and it was written so that we could control government, not the other way around. And I think there's a big disconnect between most of society. And I hope this tool that you the book that you wrote can be used as a tool for others to re-engage with how this thing is supposed to be operating.
I couldn't agree more. I think when you look at the basic civics knowledge, that people have these days, it's abysmal. And so how can we hope, or how can we even expect the average American to care about something that they really don't know about? They know what the Constitution is, but if you say, hey, can you list out the amendments and what the powers of the government are and which powers are granted to each branch of government and the limits that those powers have, most people are going to look at you with deer in the headlights. And so I think the first step is knowledge. And even before that, I should say the first step is a wanting to learn. And so that's kind of the hope with the book, is that you might have no knowledge of how the Constitution works, but you care about justice and freedom and how the foundations of our country. And, you might only know a quote or two from, a couple presidents or founding fathers. But if that's enough to inspire you to learn more, and then if you read the book and you go, hey, I want to learn more, I want to get involved, I want to run for local or state office, or get involved in a campaign for a local office, then that's what we need. We just need the little, the spark to start the fire. And so that's what I hope it can do.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that question was a good segue, Pops, because obviously you're asking about the disconnect that people have. And I also wanted to go into, George, early in the book, you mention how as a society, we have become lazy and complacent in the pursuit of a comfortable existence. I love that. I think that is so spot on. Do you mind if we dive into that a little deeper? Because I think that concept is really important to keep in the back of all of our minds as we're having these conversations.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to. Yeah.
Perfect. So tell us what inspired that specific quote, lazy and complacent in the pursuit of a comfortable existence.
So that I have to credit to my grandmother, who I never heard her say this. She passed away when I was young, but my mom would tell me that her go-to saying, and so part of the reason why this is the quote I really inspired me, was if someone who was my grandmother was saying it back in the 50s and 60s, people were feeling the same way we're feeling now. Okay, so I was like, okay, so this mentality isn't new. And her quote was, as long as people have a game to watch on the TV and a six-pack in the fridge, they're never going to get involved.
Yeah.
And I was just like, yeah, that's so true. Because how many friends do we have who, when you bring up politics, whether it be local, state, national, or globally, a lot of them go, not my problem. Oh, what am I going to do about it? I'm not in DC.
Right.
And to an extent, they're right. They're not voting on these bills, but they can write, they can call, they can go to a protest, they can get involved in a campaign that's going against the incumbent. And so you can get involved, and you can get off, the couch, turn off the game, and go outside and mingle, even if it's just as simple as talking to your neighbors to get involved. And so that's where the quote really stemmed from, of this mentality of, we're so comfortable. I mean, you look at the lifestyle we have, and we're living like the richest kings in history, every single person.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so why would we want to get involved with anything? When you're comfortable, you don't want to rock the boat. So I see it as a comfortable prison, right? We have no interest. There's no reason to get involved and stir things up. Because if you just keep your head down, do what you're told, you're going to live a pretty comfortable life.
Oh yeah, for sure. And Pops, I know you're ready to jump in on that one, because we say this every episode. I mean, pretty close.
Yeah. It's I guess it's the frog in the pot of water, and that analogy's been used many, many times. Certainly taking no credit for it myself, but I think that's exactly what it is. And I think in addition to that, George, I suspect you'd probably agree with this, that I think the education system by design has kept people disengaged, uninformed, and steered away from the Constitution. When Bree and her younger siblings were in high school, I was going up and given some instruction on the Constitution. And then all of a sudden, some folks in town who considered me to be a bit of a radical, started making a fuss in the paper and so on. And then all of a sudden I wasn't invited back. But, one of the things that we're really trying to do, that unfortunately, even though every educational institution in the country that receives any money from the federal government, as if the federal government has any authority to be involved in education, because if you can find it in there, I'd like to see it. But anyway, every institution of education from kindergarten through secondary and college education that receives federal dollars is required to give instruction on the Constitution. So I think it may be mentioned, and that has to happen during the celebration of the signing, which of course was September 17th. So during that week, they have to give instruction. And I think it may be a cursory pass, or it may be mentioned, and they consider that to be instruction. But I truthfully believe that this is by design. I think the fact that so many of us were disconnected, if you didn't take a personal interest in it, you were not going to learn anything about it. And one of our friends, he's been on the show several times with his Sheriff Richard Mack, who was the fellow that was the first sheriff in the country to file a lawsuit against the Brady Bill back in 1994, took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and had probably the greatest 10th Amendment decision ever rendered at the Supreme Court. He really brought this to my attention, even though I was involved for 20 years trying to get people involved. We got to read this Constitution. And he said, well, when I met him, as a military man, you put your hand on the Bible just like you would have had you won that seat, and you swore to uphold, defend, and preserve the Constitution. And he said maybe this came to him while he was a beat cop out in Provo, Utah. Maybe I ought to read the thing. And I think so many people have been, whether in the military or in a fire department or a police department, they swore to uphold, defend, and preserve that Constitution, but most of them have never even read it.
Yeah, and I think this is one thing that I'm sure and I know I get heat for this because I've said this to even some of our friends who are parents. And my wife and I, we have a son. He's almost 2, and so as a parent, I look at it where I was homeschooled up until about high school. Both my sisters were homeschooled through high school. But I see the education. It's really easy, and it's with pretty much every problem. It's really easy for us to blame the government and say, federal government has too much power. They're out of line. Fix it. And then we don't do anything. It's really easy to place the blame on them.
Yeah.
What's harder is to place the blame on us.
Of course.
And I would argue that we, as society, as parents, have to take a lot of the blame for how education is in this country, because it's become just more of a daycare than an education. And so parents don't want to get involved with their children's education. They want to say, oh, what'd you learn today? Okay, the planets. You learned your ABCs. Okay, great. Who was the first president? Who was the 16th president? And that's about it. But when the kids come home from school, they're drained from school. They have a ton of homework. They don't want to learn. And first off, the parents don't normally want to teach anything about civics or history at home. They all just want to sit down on the couch and be comfortably complacent. And I would argue that I think a huge problem is we need parents to want to get more involved, and not involved in the sense of, you're playing catch with your kid, or you're taking them to, soccer, on the weekends, which you should. Like, that is the best part of being a parent, as I love playing, in the backyard and playing t-ball and stuff. But we also have a responsibility to educate them, just as we want them to be physically fit when they get older, as they grow, and feed them good food and make sure they stay active. We need to teach them to read. My mother taught me a love for reading that I still have. And I thank her for that. And so I think if more parents really tried to foster a independent thinking, using your imagination as a child, and then taking that imagination to a curiosity of history and of just the world, whether it be science, math, or history, or whatever you fancy, we'd be in a much better place. So I agree that there's a lot of issues with the government and how the education system's set up, but I think we also have to look into the mirror and say, we gave a lot of this power away when we decided to not want to raise our children to the extent that we should be.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's perfectly said.
Yeah, precisely. And I think kind of to close that loop, comfortably complacent which was kind of where we started when we began down this path. I think that's exactly correct. I think most of the parents are busting their tail trying to put a roof over their head and food on a table and do all those things. And I think that also is done by design, that we're basically on the rat wheel, chasing our tail, trying to keep ahead of, everything.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think these things were done with intent. And I think as people drift away from having any understanding, how is the next generation going to know anything about it if the previous one didn't? And not only that, but they have no interest in spending time in an educational capacity. And that's where the 18 specific delegated authorities that are listed in Article 1, Section 8 have nothing to do with education, and that should have stayed at a local level. And I think that may have at least helped a little bit keep people involved. If it was something that you could manage at the local level as it was originally intended, you could go down to the school board meeting and you could make a difference at what kind of education your child was receiving, instead of coming down from on high where you really have no ability to affect the mandates that are coming down. So there's many pieces to that, but I think you're hitting on the point where we still have an opportunity to become involved as parents, whether it's because of what's coming out of Washington or because of what's coming out of our local school board. We have to get up off the couches. We've encouraged many, many times here on this podcast is to you have to get up and be engaged. To your point, if you stop on the way home, grab your 6-pack of beer and plop on the couch and all is well in the world, then you have absolutely no opportunity to change the direction that we are on.
And my mentality too is, who better to change the direction than our children?
Exactly.
And, if we might not see the change, I might be 80 years old and just get a glimpse that things are getting better. But I'm okay with that if it means that I helped start that. If my son's generation is the one to fix it, because all of us are getting involved, and then they raise children who are really into it, then, we can reverse this cycle just as easily as it's come into play in a negative way. We can push back in a positive way. But it's a generational thing. And so we can't get too hasty. We have to have patience, but we can't get lazy on it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think all that's absolutely correct. And it's definitely something we've talked about here, having had a couple homeschooling episodes. It feels as though there is such a transition right now. And we've actually talked about this fairly recently, where it feels to me, as much as it's easy to look at the generation right below us, not as young as your little guy, your little 2-year-old, but right below us, it feels sometimes like it's so easy to be like, oh, they don't care. Nobody cares. But at the same time, I really believe this is the first group that has such a change happening within it, underneath us, because there is so much of our generation and your generation, Dad, that have transitioned into homeschooling, that have transitioned away from a lot of the would-be normal before that, because it has started to get so bad. And, during COVID, that really big awakening started to happen. So now you have all these people who are up and coming parents that are raising their kids outside of that box that they felt placed in. So I agree with you. I think it's something that's a lot further down the pike, but I think it's there.
I think it is there. And I think too I think that, however you want to phrase it, but the those in power, or the players that be, I think they've played their hand a little too far, to your point. And the younger generation, the one just below us, what is it, the Generation Z, the Zoomers, I think a lot of them are starting to see how things are, and they're tired of it. They don't want to deal with it. And so I hope there's a pushback. I forget what comedian it was, but he was saying how a lot of kids these days in high school are becoming traditional, having traditional values, going to church. And he joked about it, saying, well, yeah, of course they are. Kids want to be rebellious at that age. And so when you when you look at society today, the only way to truly rebel is to be conservative.
Yeah.
And it's a good joke, but I think there's some truth to it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They want a regular marriage. They want kids. They want to grow their own food. They want chickens. And it's happening. I mean, I can really see that shift happening. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Pops, anything else you want to add there?
A couple of points before. I know you have a couple other specific questions related to some other things in the book, but a couple of points that come out of this part of discussion that I think were absolutely noteworthy. And number one was the fact that, we're talking about how generationally we try to affect our kids and vice versa. But here, George is mentioning something that has stayed very important to him, and that was a remark that his grandmother made. And I think that shows you a reconnect where that is the value of a nice, solid family unit. It's the key to everything. If you don't have a good family unit, you don't have a good community and state and so on. So I think that was a perfectly placed example of how powerful good family figures are. I also wanted to comment, and Bree already took it out of my mouth, about the previous guest and discussions related to homeschooling, including our guest last week, who also noted, and he's older than I, that there's a big uptick in homeschooling. Therefore, people are recognizing that what is going on in the schoolhouse is not what they would like their child to be exposed to. I'm taking control of this and bringing it back under my roof, and that's absolutely fantastic. And the last thing related to this whole piece on the schooling and so forth is, Bree and I have had to discussion many times over the past year and a half on these podcasts. The young people, and by that I mean 40 years and down, by the time you get to the workplace, and in that 40 years to the entry into the workplace, that is the group that makes change. The older folks, we can provide ideas and suggestions, maybe even financial resources, but the energy comes from younger folks. And if we see this piling up now where homeschooling is affecting a larger piece of the population, we're starting to feel some momentum coming for future generations in that young group, and that's where change will come from.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Okay, right. Bree, what do you got next out of the book? That was a good segment there.
Yeah, we really went down an education tangent, but I think that was good. Yeah. So you kind of mentioned the ever-changing, ever-dramatic news cycles at one point. So I did want to touch on that, of course, this week, because there's so much chaos, as always. And with some of the issues facing us this week, I mean, let's just, look at a couple of the big ones. We have immigrant wars starting in our own cities, and we have Big Brother breathing down our neck with new surveillance tech creeping in. And this idea of government crises and selling safety and protection for the low cost of just our freedom, it isn't new, but it seems to literally be getting worse every single day. And you talk a lot about freedom versus security in your book. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on some of these things that we're seeing, just this week.
Yeah, I think that who said it was either Rahm Emanuel or Hillary Clinton was never let a good crisis go to waste.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I believe they both said it. I can't remember who said it first, but when we look at any of these cycles, there's always something to be gained from one side or the other. And to your point, you brought up that it seems like there's more and more constantly happening. I don't know. I honestly don't know if that's true or not. I think something we have to keep in mind is these things.
Yeah, we see more.
We see a lot more.
Yeah.
There might have been as much stuff going on when, our parents were our age, our grandparents were our age. I mean, there was as much stuff when you really dive into history. There were incredible events happening in cities and small towns throughout America about governments and corruption and stuff, but they don't make the history books, so we don't really learn about them.
Yeah.
Now every single aspect is recorded and goes on Twitter or X and is, viral in 5 minutes. So I think that is something we have to keep in mind, because we don't want to, there's all those terms of the different pills to take.
Yeah.
There's the black pill is the don't be so depressed about the future. And I really don't think we should go down that route in that regard. So you might be right. They might be happening more and more, but at the same time, it might just be this is human nature. Events come and play, and they play their part and whatnot. But let's not get over worried about it. With the stuff that's happening today, I think that the trouble I have, and we all have it, is that we want to react immediately, especially because of social media, because of our phones. We have to take a step back and recognize what the long con is.
Yeah.
And so it's very easy to, like with the LA riots right now and the protests, it's very easy to say, send in the Marines, send in the government, let's squash this and let's round them all up and throw them over the border. Very easy to say that, and a lot of people would agree. Then we have to look, okay, 10 years down the road, now the precedent has been set. That same power could be used for something else.
Yeah.
Right? Democrats might be in power, and there might be a protest, that's more a conservative protest going on, and then they throw everyone in prison, which we saw with January 6th, which is another very hot debate. Should some of those people have been thrown in jail? Should some of them not? Yes and no. It's a huge, right? That's a whole nother can of worms to open up. So the big thing I always look at is what is the precedent that's being set? Because you always have to assume that whatever power you have today can be used against you tomorrow. And so that's how I kind of evaluate whatever is the weekly event and what the quote unquote solutions are to that.
Yeah. No, I think that's perfect. And that's why I kind of bring up the idea of like all this surveillance stuff going on, because right now, if you're in the, I'm cool with anything Trump does camp, then you're like, it's chill. This is completely normal and fine. But if you're like, well, what could that be used for later camp? Then it's a little bit suspicious and unnerving.
Yeah. And I mean, the Patriot Act, I think, is the greatest example we have of that.
Totally.
9/11 happens, Twin Towers fall, Pentagon's hit, thousands dead in a matter of hours, right? An attack on U.S. soil.
Yeah.
Government comes in and says, we need all of this permission, all of this power and technology to pretty much document and keep track of everything. Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense, right? Could it have stopped this tragedy? And they say, with a complete assurance, yep, we could have stopped 9/11
yeah.
if you had just given us this power beforehand. Oh, well, we don't want that to happen again. Of course. Take whatever power you need. 20 plus years later, they still have that power. And the argument could be made, well, there hasn't been another 9/11. True. But at what cost?
Right.
And is there give and take? Is there some aspects of the Patriot Act that should stay in play, that is actually doing its job of keeping national security? And then there are other aspects that are unconstitutional that need to be thrown away. And that's where the safety for security, where you say, how much do we need? And that's a very difficult question to answer that, I don't have the answer for. I don't think any of us do. That's something that as a society we need to, for lack of a better term, vote on. And not vote on that single issue, but we need to vote by putting people into office who are willing to make those calls.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Pops?
Yeah. Well, I look at this one a little different. First of all, I'll talk about the phones, and they do provide instant, however you want to call it, but it is disseminated instantly to everybody where we may not have had those things earlier. But I would also suggest then that we also have a tool that we can use that has the same ability. They're give and take. There, people got the bigger bully pulpit and can use it more widely. And you might get what do they call it, Bree, when they silence the voices they don't like to hear?
You shadow ban.
Yeah, of course. So anything that doesn't go along with the powers that be's agenda, you could be shadow banned or henceforth silenced. But I think that the thing is a great tool, as also it is a great exposer of events much more rapidly than any generation before. The next couple of points, and this is where an understanding and living by the document makes all the difference in the world. So the LA riots appear to be going on, depending on who you listen to, because ICE started them or because they were in there trying to round up people that were supposedly here illegally. And if that's the case, the federal government is charged with that task as one of the delegated authorities as having jurisdiction over a uniform code of naturalization. They have that authority. Secondarily, the point related to the Patriot Act, completely unconstitutional in my estimation, related to almost everything that's in there. And to your point, George, if there was some emergency power, which, by the way, the federal government does not have emergency power that can supersede the Constitution. It does not. Under no circumstances, COVID or 911 does not have emergency powers. It is not granted. So the Congress has the authority to authorize activity, provided it is within the 18 delegated authorities that are spelled out very clearly in Article 1, Section 8, and further reinforced by the 10th Amendment. And I think to go all the way back to our point we made in the first segment related to education, I think if 100 or 150 million or half of us understood these things, there'd be a lot less of it going on. But, we all stood, or I suppose many people stood and cheered because the federal government's taking a very outward approach to protecting us. But back to your security versus safety, there is no authority to go outside the bounds of the Fourth Amendment, which was probably the biggest violation, was the Fourth Amendment by the Patriot Act and further Surveillance Act that Bree was mentioning. So I think a root of the problem really comes down to society at large being comfortably complacent, as you so eloquently put it. I think that has a lot to do with it. And furthermore, really not understanding what is supposed to contain the federal government from running wild. And if you don't know what is supposed to, how can you help participate in containing that entity?
Yeah, and I think when we look at all the surveillance aspect with the Palantir proposal coming in, we really we kind of have a basis already to see what the worst case scenario is when we look at China's social credit system.
Right.
And it's not absurd or conspiracy theory levels to say, oh, if we implement this level of scrutiny on every single person's individual day-to-day actions, then we could flip the switch and they go into that. And I'm not saying it's going to be that. I hope it's not. But when you look at all the tools that are needed to implement that, if they're there, then it just takes one bad actor or one bad administration. And, plus maybe there's another crisis where they say, nope, we need this and let's implement it right away for your safety. So to your point with the security and all the overwatch and everything, I think we should be very, very, very skeptical and cautious about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are the conversations that people steer away from, like we've been saying the whole episode, because maybe it feels like it's so far removed from their day to day, or there's nothing that they can do, when in fact, these are the conversations that we should all be having all the time with each other, so that we can reach out to the people that are at our most local level and a little further if we are inspired to do so, and on, so that we can actually implement change. Because we've talked about several times on this show, there have been times where we've seen these changes happen when enough people get involved. It's just a matter of inspiring people to care enough.
It's also, you're absolutely right. I think the other aspect that is really, really tricky is certain issues like this when it comes to national security. And another kind of third rail of politics is, gun ownership and the Second Amendment, is the argument for implementing these laws and these restrictions is always for safety and, well, if it would save one life.
Yeah.
And it's really, really morally tough to be the person on the other side saying, it's very easy for them to accuse the other side saying, well, you just don't care about other people's lives. And so if you are in the pro-freedom, if you're going to weigh it and you're going to be more freedom than safety, we have to really specialize and really finesse how we respond to that attack, so that we don't just say, oh, no, I don't care about lives. My freedom is more important.
Right.
Because you're never going to win people over by that. And it's also not true. And so I think that's what's really tricky about why a lot of people don't want to talk about it with your neighbors or with other with people in office, because it's so easy to discount your opinion with that one simple attack.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And that's where having that background in some of this stuff is really critical, because if you don't have that foundation, so to speak, you have nothing to fall back on when those arguments happen. So yeah, I think that's a fantastic point.
That is precisely it, and I think again we're circling all the way back to lazy and complacent. If everybody took a little time to understand a couple of key issues, just a couple, like Bree said last week on the podcast, you don't have to know everything about everyone, but take a couple of key issues that are near and dear to your heart and study them like most of the country studies the numbers of their favorite football team. They can recite all of that stuff, but they cannot tell you one thing, like you mentioned, the China social credit system. How many people can recite every number on their favorite football team and where the player went to college and all the rest of it, but they absolutely know nothing about the China social credit system and how close that is to coming to reality here, only because of our own complacency. So you have to put energy into this. The defense of liberty, as Thomas Jefferson and so many others, it takes eternal vigilance. We have to be looking at it every single time. And one of the things that Albert Einstein said is every single one of us have to be committed to the defense of these rights, or you're not going to have them. Well, how far are we from that? And that's what's encouraging. Bree has always been an uplift, and now you, George, as part of the younger generation coming behind us, to see that there are interested folks out there that are educating themselves on these issues so that they can talk and teach the next generation about what we lost.
Absolutely. It comes down to just personal responsibility.
100%.
At the end of the day, if every single one of us just looked at our lives every day we woke up and said, every single act I take is for the betterment of myself and my family, and then extension my community, we look where we'd be. The issues of safety, security, every aspect would fall by the wayside because they'd be handled at a personal level, at a family level, and at a society's level. So I think you're absolutely right on that. Yeah.
Yeah, we agree with that 100%. A quote that I've brought up many, many times, just to, go back to your point, if every single one of us did it, amazing. I mean, problem solved tomorrow, but unrealistic, right? So one quote I always bring up is Sam Adams said it, I don't remember the exact, it's not in front of me, but it's like, an irate, tireless few is all it takes to inspire brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. And so I always try to reiterate on that show, because it doesn't actually take that many of us. I think for so many people, the reason they don't get involved is because they think their voice and their opinion doesn't matter. So they stay outside of it. They think there's not enough of us that care, but it takes a minority. We've seen that so many times throughout history, where you don't have to be 99% of the population to make your case. You just have to be irate and tireless. And these things will happen, and you can make a big enough change to impact future generations. So I agree with you 1,000%. I think it all comes down to personal responsibility. I just think it takes less of us than people think, and they shouldn't be afraid to get involved, because knowing that it doesn't take a lot of us, I think, can be inspiring for people.
Yeah, that is a great point. I couldn't agree more.
I want to highlight another tool that we have in our toolbox, guy. I know it's hard to believe, but we're getting close to an hour already. But one of the things that's oftentimes overlooked, I believe, and again, our good friend Sheriff Mack out of Arizona helped us with this, is states. So let's not try to fix the federal government ourselves. Let's use the states, and the 10th Amendment gives us the authority, and Mack and Prince versus U.S. settled in 1997. Not that far back, greatest 10th Amendment case ever settled at the Supreme Court level. It tells us states are not subject to federal direction. So if we start at the local level and we start changing things at the counties, at the school board and at the county seat, and all of a sudden there's an area within a county that's starting to affect state policy and state politics, now you can use that state to control the federal government, which are the spheres that we are supposed to be operating in. We're sitting at home thinking, how do we change the federal government? How do we change it? We don't have to. We have to change the local government, and then the local government affect the state government, and the states have 100% settled at the Supreme Court, documented in the Constitution, authority to rein in the federal government. And I think that's by you participating at a local level, and I hope you get back in and do it again. I hope you find the courage and the stomach. I had one run, and that was enough for me. You're young enough. Take another swing at it. We need people that understand the way this thing is supposed to work, to be that brush fire for people to rally around and affect things at the local level. And then you can affect things at the state level. Look at Illinois, for God's sake. It's like many of them. The whole state politics are affected by Chicago, where most of the state does not have those views on things. So if you got the state behind it, the state could then help rein in the federal government that's operating completely boundless right now.
Yeah, no, Illinois is a great example of that, which I know far too well, but yeah. For better and for worse. But no, you're spot on that assessment. I couldn't agree more.
Hey, Bree, before this thing is over, did you have any other? I mean, we hardly got into the book here much at all, and this hour is flown by.
Well, that's okay. I think this wonderful conversation we've had with George will be enough for people to want to dive into his book on their own. And
I have time if you want to get into a couple of more, but whatever is best for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're great. We're having fun. And George, I have to pay you a compliment. My dad doesn't usually, go to this level of fired up unless it's just the two of us. So,
I take it as a compliment. Absolutely. No, I love talking to people who are as passionate and knowledgeable about it. So this is great.
Well, yeah. I do have to tell you in all sincerity that it is so encouraging, and I'm very proud of Bree and my other children who are not involved with this podcast, but they're equally dialed in on what's going on around us. It is so encouraging to see younger people starting to recognize that we've lost a big part of what the blood of our forefathers purchased for us, and it is up to us to get that back. And we are trying desperately here at the Fourth Box to refrain from getting to that fourth box. We have these other tools, and we are trying through the soapbox such as this and encouraging participation in public office and so on. And of course, the jury box, which we didn't get to tonight, but we really are desperate to find a way to solve this problem so our posterity does not live under the same condition that our ancestors fled from.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's so much of what you're doing, George. I mean, I think obviously a lot of your inspiration, yes, comes from what happened during COVID, and it comes from Thomas Paine, but it also comes from your kid.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, children are the future, as cliche as it sounds. And I didn't truly get that until I had one. But, it was funny is after he was born, I had this thought where, when you read through all these history books, you hear about these kings and these emperors conquering land, and they're doing so, and they always are worried about, whether they can have a son, because at that time, that's how you consolidated power, not for yourself, but for your next generation.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole aspect of how that should work is a different topic. But the mentality of them wanting to continue their family and keep what they've earned and they've conquered in their family so that their next generation can be better. I had this thought where I remember holding him, looking at him, and I just thought, I would burn or build cities for you. Mm-hmm. And I've known you for like an hour. And so it hit me. I was like, that's our human nature of just wanting to build a better future by any means necessary. As you guys say with the Fourth Box, I pray that we'll never have to, but in my mind, it's not off the table.
Of course.
If it means that it's a better future for my son and hopefully more kids down the road. I think it was Thomas Jefferson, I believe, who said, I'm paraphrasing it, but it was, I will be a soldier today so that I will study war today so that my children may study the sciences and arts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's that same idea of, I'll go through the hardships today.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So that they can live a cushy life. And by cushy life, I don't want them to get comfortably complacent. We've seen how that goes.
Mm-hmm.
But if they can live a better life that's not filled as much with as much worry, then absolutely, I'll go through whatever that needs to be done.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look at the alternative. If we don't instill these ideas in the next generation, then what alternative do we have? And you go into this in your book. You know, you talk about a future without freedom, and how far away from that are we really?
No, I mean, you look at, if you read 1984.
Yeah.
How far are we from that? I mean, George Orwell, it was supposed to be a work of fiction that was, warning us about potential futures. But you look at it now and we're pretty close.
Yeah.
Whether you like to admit it or not. And obviously we're not all the way there yet, but the idea that the world in the book is at a constant state of war, and everything you do is for your government and for your safety, and you can't step out of the lines, you can't question anything. I mean, that sounds like the past 20 years in the Middle East. It sounds like how COVID was. You couldn't even question the science. It sounds like politics. Whenever there's a bill coming up, no, don't question it. The party, whether it's Republicans and Democrats.
That's correct.
Like the big, beautiful bill coming up. If you question it, you're not part of MAGA.
Yeah.
Right? And so when we look at all these aspects, we really got to ask ourselves, are we allowed to think for ourselves anymore, or is that becoming taboo?
100%.
And selfishly too, I know that there's a lot of disdain in this generation, whether it's justified or not, to one degree or another. I think it is and it isn't. But there's a lot of disdain that millennials have towards the boomer generation, because there was a lot of government overreach that passed during their time,
of course,
that is now affecting us in a negative manner. And selfishly, I don't want to be looked at that by my grandkids. I don't want in 40, 50 years, my grandkids and my kids looking at me and going, hey, you guys could have fixed it, but you only made it worse because you didn't do anything.
Yeah.
So selfishly, I'm like, I don't want to have that conversation at Thanksgiving in 50 years.
Yeah, well, that's a good motivator, honestly.
Yeah.
That's amazing that you say that, because one of the early pieces I wrote when my kids were quite small was an apology to my kids because of the state of things back then. And that was, Breeze 32. So that was 25 plus years ago. I was making the same observations, and I was expressing to my children, and hopefully they will look back at that someday, at that piece that I wrote, and basically was apologizing for the state of affairs this country's in, and it should have never been left to get to that. One other point I wanted to leave with you that I always use as a yardstick, and it's a very simple statement, but I'd like to leave this with you is free men don't need permits. So if you want to know how far we are from being free, look at how many permits you have to have, probably just to mow your grass and park your car out there in Chicago, let alone all the rest of them with your employment and all the rest of it. That's true.
You'd be surprised how accurate you are about that statement.
Yeah. Well, I've spent some time in Chicago, and I try to hurry out, but I may have to run out there tomorrow, actually, for some work. But anyway, I in case we are wrapping it up, I want to express our sincere gratitude for having you with us tonight. I want to thank you for your service in the military. I want to congratulate you as a new father, and I want to congratulate you also having stuck your nose into a political campaign. And I do really encourage you to try it again. Abraham Lincoln tried many times before he finally hit one. And I think it had a significant impact on our country and our future. And I would like you to encourage you to stay involved, even if it's not running, but stay involved with your writing and being involved in your local, politics and events out there. It's been a real pleasure meeting you.
No, thank you. The pleasure's been mine. And on your note with that, with wanting to run again, is, as I said earlier, if an opportunity is presented to me, I will always jump on it. But a great inspiration for me is George Washington, who didn't want to be president. Mm-hmm. They were practically begging him to be president, and then he got out after 2 terms. They were asking him, stay. He could have stayed in and been president as long as he wanted to, but he set the precedent of 2 terms. He didn't want all that power. And I think that he serves as a great inspiration for anyone who's thinking about the idea of politics, is that it shouldn't be something you want to do. I talk about it in the book a bit, where it used to be you have your job, you have your way of living and your career, and service is running for office.
Yep.
And you do a couple terms, you don't make any money. You have to step away from your business that you may own or your farm or whatnot. And then you serve your community in DC or in the states or the state capital, and then you come back home. And so it was like a sense of service. And so for me, I see it as, if the opportunities were given to me, I will jump on it. But it's never something that I will pursue out of a sense of wanting to make a name for myself or make money, or even to make a drastic change. Because I really worry when you look at history, people who want to do the right thing and they push for power, it doesn't always end well. It's very corruptible, and people are flawed too. We're all flawed. So I appreciate that, and I hope the opportunity does present itself. But who knows? And one of the things, while I mentioned it with service, I think this is we've kind of been talking about with being involved, is you said it yourself to me about my service. You said, thank you for your service. But when's the last time you even thought saying that to an elected official?
Yeah.
Right?
Never.
It was supposed, right? Never. And it was supposed to be that, though. It was supposed to be public service. It is public service by definition.
Yeah.
And so I think if people really took that to heart and said, wait, I've never thought to thank my elected official, my senator, my congressman, I want to spit at him instead.
Yeah.
If they really thought about that, maybe we'd make a change. Maybe they change who they vote for, their priorities are. And also the people running, they would have a different outlook if they actually saw it as service. Because I would love to meet my congressman and shake him or her in the hand and say, thank you for your service.
Oh, yeah.
I can't right now, but how great would that feel?
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's such a powerful point. And I know we're kind of in like wrap up world here, but I do have one more, and I think it's sort of relevant because it sort of ties into these last couple conversations. And in your book, you bring up a pretty powerful point, and I think it might be earlier in the book actually, but that while much of the Constitution and the founding documents have become twisted to kind of fit this modern age idea, even by those claiming to defend it, something that cannot be twisted is what freedom is and what freedom was meant to be. That doesn't change. Freedom, the true definition of freedom, that does not change. You can't spin it to mean something different than it did 200 years ago. And yet, it really isn't even close to 200 years ago when we think about, like, Dad, you just said free men don't need permits. Okay, let's weigh how many permits I need today versus, something my great-great-grandparents needed. Like, we're not even living in the same world. So something that we talk a lot about on the Fourth Box is that the reason that people aren't involved is because they aren't angry. And they're not angry because they don't know that their freedom has already been lost. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think it's, we talked about the Constitution, and one of the big things about it is if it loses its value, if it loses its respect, it's just a piece of paper. Yeah. Because it is. It is just a piece of paper. So many of the rights we have, we like to jump and say, "Oh, it's in the Constitution. You can't mess with it." But it's just a piece of paper. We've had these freedoms before the Constitution. That's why they were written. And so the Constitution is more just giving in detail, and it's kind of bringing out the rights that we have, that we all are God-given rights.
Yeah.
And when we look at that, I think we should really recognize that it doesn't matter what the piece of paper says, because it can be changed. We could have a constitutional convention tomorrow, and they could throw out the whole Constitution and say, hey, we're a dictatorship. You have no more rights, period. Boom. Oh, well, that's happened. The Constitution's no more. Or you could say, well, the Constitution didn't truly matter. It wasn't the bedrock. Like we said, the Constitution is the bedrock. The bedrock beneath that are our God-given rights. And so I think that's something we can all look at and understand is life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And And, I when you mentioned it with the book, I actually pulled it up right here. What I said was, freedom is something that holds value above all else. Gives every single human being the opportunity to make a name for themselves, to be a unique individual, and to live a life that brings joy and purpose to those around them. If we all lived a life like that and we were all given the opportunities to live that type of life, once again, easier said than done. But look, can you all mainly imagine where our country would be?
Yeah. Yeah. Worlds away, to be honest.
Yeah.
And the more people that are working toward that end, the better the chance that we'll get something close.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You're never going to bat 1,000, but
no.
we can get as close as we can.
We got to get up in the box and take a swing at it. Yep. We got to get off the couch.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Precisely. Yeah.
Well, George, this has been so fun. We don't want to keep you any longer. We can't thank you enough for coming on. We'd love for you to just, give another shout out for where people can find your book now, what people should be looking for in the future when your new book comes out, what that timeline even looks like, and anywhere else people can find you.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. It's Hillworth Dying On. And then I'm also on X it's at Worth Dying On. Or if you search a Hillworth Dying On, it'll come up. Other than that, with the book, I don't have exact details on when it'll be ready. I'm still working with the publisher and we're going back and forth on adding and taking out, as that process has been fun to learn.
Sure.
Going from self-published to that, it's been another learning experience. But once I get more details on that, I will definitely reach out to you guys. I'll be putting it on my social media. And I'd love to be back on with you guys in the future.
Yeah,
and I guess if you don't mind, the last words of closing, which I think we all need some words of encouragement, some words of inspiration. And it's the last two sentences in the book. America has no place for the cowardly, nor does she welcome tyrants. Rather, she is what she was always meant to be, a land of the free and a home of the brave. Those words applied in 1776, and I think they apply today in 2025.
Yeah,
absolutely do. Correct.
That was perfect. Yeah, and you're more than welcome to come on anytime. I really can't express it enough. You had him all riled up. Yeah, we had a great time.
This was a blast. I had a great time. The time flew. I looked over at the clock and I was like, oh man, it has been an hour. So Thank you so much for having me. And I definitely look forward to being on again soon.
Perfect.
And thank you for what you guys are doing. It's awesome. You talked about with the phones. We all get involved. You guys doing shows like this. It doesn't matter if you're reaching 12 people or millions like Joe Rogan. We all have to do our part, and we reach out who we can. We make the changes where we can, and we grow from there. So thank you so much for what you guys are doing. I truly, from the bottom of my heart, appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate that. That really does mean a lot. And we agree with you. Everything every one of us can do, it makes a difference. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
You don't mind staying another moment? Pops usually closes us out with a Bible verse. So
Of course.
Okay. The Lord is near to all who call on him, to all who call on him in truth. And that is Psalms 145, verse 18. Thanks again, George. It was our pleasure to have spent some time with you. All the best to your family, and we look forward to having you back on the show.
Thank you. Thank you again, and all the best to you guys as well.
All right, so that was George Kemper, everybody. Once again, you can find his current book, which, as he said, it's like 50, 60 pages. This does not take a lot of effort. It's like $9. Like, I am telling you, this book puts everything that we feel and haven't been able to, describe in one brief episode. It puts it in one easy to read text. I cannot recommend it enough. We'll link it in the show notes. It's A Hill Worth Dying On he used, what do they call it? A pen name? Timothy Edwards. So
he did.
His next book will be coming out under his name, and we will absolutely be sharing that as well. But just a huge thank you to George. Super fun conversation. Look forward to another episode with him in the future.
Yeah, for sure. And until next time,
stay vigilant. Thank you so much for listening. We really do appreciate the support and truly love getting to share this message with anyone who wants or needs it. The best way for you to support the show is to subscribe, add a rating, and share with everyone you know. You can find us on Instagram, X, and at thefourthbox.com. We'll see you next Thursday at 6 p.m. Stay vigilant.